Welcome to the First Existentialist Congregation of Atlanta. I'll sing that again without a mask. Welcome to the First Existentialist Congregation of Atlanta, and our musician today is Elise Witt, and she will announce the first song.
Greetings, everyone. It's so good to be here with you. I have 3 songs in the new edition hymnal, so we're going to do those today as well as some others, but you don't need your hymnal right now. What you need to do is sing this. Open the window, let the dove fly in.
Open the window, let the dove fly in.
So that's the response. I'm going to call out some situations that need opening for the dove to fly in. And we have a chorus that you can use sign language, and of course percussion is great too. But make a windowsill. Make a windowsill with this arm. Here. And then take your other arm and open the window. So this is the American Sign Language for open the window. And then we say children. We gather the children around. Good. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. It goes like this. Open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. We'll take a rocking doors built so high.
Open the window, let the dove fly in.
Don't see what's to the dove on the other side.
Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. 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 Open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. 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 Window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly
Some rock and gospel piano on it.
Thank you, Elise. Welcome to the First Existentialist Congregation of Atlanta. We are a spiritual community, philosophically based on existentialist and feminist principles. Dedicated to human liberation. We make our spiritual home in the old stone church, which was hand-built by the African-American Antioch East Baptist Church. We acknowledge that racial hostility drove these African Americans from the area, and we honor them and the powerful history of this place. We also acknowledge that in the 1800s, the Muskogee Creek people were driven from this land, and we support justice for all Indigenous people. As we are assembled today on September 11th, I think it's appropriate to take a moment to reflect on the events of September 11th, 2001, which ushered in a new age for us and affected our lives immensely. And I think this poem reflects some of our thoughts on that day and several days after. And I forgot to bring the poem. It's sitting by my computer. I will try to say it as eloquently as I can. New day of infamy. Out of the blue comes a new age. Castles collapse, flags rise, handsome firemen and innocents vanish. Rebel mushrooms across the screens of America. Debris from a century of neo-colonialism, a millennium of crusades and jihad. Suffocating my brothers and sisters grieve our children's 1,000-year war. Times change. Changing next spring into a poetry gap, a walk in the woods. But for now, war will have to do. That's by Wade Marble. I wrote that 3 days after September 14th. Oh, I got it. I wrote that after a dream on September 14th. Do we have any newcomers here today that would like to introduce yourselves? It seems like we are all familiar faces today. Anyone that has not been here for a long time would like to stand and say a word? Thank you all for coming. Do we have any birthdays or milestones? Whoa!
Wednesday, September 14th is my birthday. Thank you.
We're going to sing to you, Lee.
Come up here, and since you were a musician, you could lead the song. Let's have someone get on key for happy birthday. It wasn't a birthday, I'm sorry.
It's going to be Wednesday. This is my first birthday song. But I plan to go for 69 more days.
Okay. Everyone stand, please. Never and Willie.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Lee. Happy birthday to you.
Are there any others?
My wife and I will celebrate 64 years together.
Happy anniversary to you. Happy anniversary to you. Happy anniversary, dear.
Congratulations.
I know what their date was.
We're having our next congregational song and
This is another one in the book that you don't need to look at, but I do need your ideas. This is a song, I actually wrote it with kids, thinking about something that we did today that we want to do again tomorrow. So it doesn't have to be literally today. Sorry. Something that we did today that we also want to continue doing tomorrow, and it doesn't have to be literally today. Something that we are currently doing that we want to continue doing. So it goes like this. I climbed a mountain today. I climbed a mountain today. I climbed a mountain today. Gonna climb another one tomorrow. If you want to stand, let's do, and let's rock it. And then be thinking about what our next verse should be. I have a few ideas, but I think you probably have better ones. I like this. Let's see what I'm thinking about. Oh yeah. Here we go. I climbed the mountain. 1, 2, 3. I climbed the mountain today. I climbed the mountain today. I climbed the mountain today. Gonna climb another one tomorrow. I sang a song today. I sang a song today. I sang a song today. Gonna sing another one tomorrow.
Vote for justice.
I
Vote for justice today. I vote for justice today. I vote for justice today. I vote for justice tomorrow.
I learn our history. Yes. I learn our
History today. I learn our history today. I learn our history today. I learn our history tomorrow.
recycle.
I recycle today. I recycle today. I recycle today. Gonna recycle tomorrow.
if anyone has a community announcement, please write it down. There's a pad at the table here behind the chairs, and bring that up to me, and we'll read those a little later in the service. Marcia is not here today, is that correct? So our fellowship minister moment, we'll move on to we have a moment of silent meditation. We'll take 5 minutes. There are candles on this side that you can light, and we'll have some meditation. Next, we'll have another congregational song, please.
This is another one that's in the new hymnal, and if you'd like, you can look along with this. The chorus you don't need the book for, but if you want to sing along in the verses, you're welcome to look in the book. It's called Only Love Will Do. And that is under the letter O. So, this is kind of maybe a little bit of a tribute to musically the Carol King, and also my friend Terry Garthley from California. But you know, a lot of people talk about we have really only one choice in this life, the choice between fear and love. Feel what love will do. Can you feel it? Feel what love will do. Can you feel it? Feel what love will do. Love, sweet love, only love will do. Love, sweet love, only love will do. My little devil on the shoulder, in my ear. An angel on the other tells me what I need to hear. Show me eyes, the abundantly clear. Act out of love, or act out of fear. If we can feel it, what love will do next. Love will do, can we feel what love will do? Love, sweet love, only love will do. Love, sweet love, only love will do. Come on, people, are we listening to that devil in our ear? Distracting our attention from the love we don't quite see. On earth we hold a delicate balance in our hands. But let the fear see us, or can we take a stand? Oh, can we feel what love will do? Okay, can you feel what love will do? Can you feel love will do? Love, sweet love, only love will do. Sing it like you mean it. Love, sweet love, only love will do. Love, sweet love, only love will do.
At this time, if anyone has any joy.
Y'all are a singing congregation. So many of you know that I teach at a... Sorry. Many of you know that I teach at a special purpose middle school for teenage refugee girls with interrupted education. It's called the Global Village Project. And basically, I use singing to teach English. But I also, one of the things we say is that every student is a teacher, and every teacher is a student. So this is a song that I learned from my girls. It's a very popular song on YouTube if you want to look it up. It's called Salam Alaikum, and that's the chorus. You can sing along with me. The rest of it is in English. So. You try to turn off the sun, still gonna shine away and tell everyone we're having some fun today. We can go wherever you wanna and do whatever you like. Let's just have a real good time. Assalamu alaikum, alaikum, yeah, which means peace be to you. Assalamu alaikum, alaikum, yeah. Assalamu
peace on the earth, cherish the love that is around us. Spread peace on the earth, treasure the love that is surround us. Always be kind, always remind one another. Spread peace on the earth every day.
Thank you, Elise. Our speaker for today is Kathy McGuire, speaking on the topic of back to school. Originally hailing from San Antonio, Texas, Kathy is a lifelong learner with diverse interests, holding degrees in psychology, biomedical science, music performance, and public administration. She and her family live on a small farm in the woods in Conyers, where they enjoy the company of chickens, quail, ducks, rabbits, cats, and dogs. During the work week, you can find her at Oxford College and Emory University, where she serves as a director of institutional research. Please welcome our fellow member of First E, Kathy McGuire.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So you may have noticed, I guess, or figured out from my brief bio that I'm a bit of a lifelong learner, perpetual student, and involved in education. And I just kind of love this time of year. When I had the idea to maybe do this particular talk, I was thinking about a way to mark the start of the school year any time between July and September. We have students going back to school for the year. We have educators going back. I'm actually an administrator right now, so although I do work all year, I work through the summer, it's still wonderful to have the students come back and the faculty come back. The campus is very different in the summer when the students and faculty are mostly not around. And it just, it has new life in the fall when everybody comes back. I also thought about, well, why me? Why should I talk about education? And maybe I was, having a little bit of imposter syndrome. And I also thought, because we have so many people in our congregation who are involved with education, we've got Professor Emeritine, we've got, active K through 12, teachers. And certainly we've got psychologists who study learning and memory and these kinds of things. University teachers who teach applied things, like our own, Ted Pettis, who teaches anatomy at a medical school. So why me? Why should I talk about education? And so I wanted to address that a little bit and give you, I want to talk a little bit about my background and why I'm kind of passionate about education. And then I'm going to talk about some educational theories or research that I think people need to know more about because they're kind of exciting. And I hope that part won't be too technical. But I do want to talk about my own experience first. So first of all, I come from an academic, a teaching family. I have, grandparents who are teachers. I joke you can't throw a rock at my family tree without, hitting a PhD, which is true. We do have a lot of people who are college professors and have doctorates, My parents were both in graduate school when I was born. My mother was finishing, she had a degree in early childhood education and was getting her master's to become a school librarian in library science. And my dad was getting his doctorate in economics, when I was born. So I clearly came from a family that valued education. And I always was encouraged to learn. I was always encouraged to learn things. I wasn't always a great student. I know middle school was really hard for me for some reason. I was kind of barely making it in middle school. And a lot of people, don't know this, but I actually flunked out of my first year of college. And I think that speaks to something that I am going to talk about, which is the value of being able to recover from failure, which is an important part of learning. And one thing I didn't mention, I love the synchronicities that happen among facilitators and speakers and musicians. In our program sometimes, because one other reason I'm thinking about education right now is because I decided I was, for the first time, I'm allowed to take a class for free every semester if I want to, just to sit in on it. And so I decided to do that. So the class I'm sitting in on, as with a bunch of, first-year college students, is Arabic 101. Yeah. And it's really interesting. I think, languages really stretch your mind. And also, your assumptions, too, because you really learn about people when you learn their language. You mentioned some of my, kind of weird collection of academic credentials. And I think part of that, I do love to learn. I remember being in high school and thinking, I can't wait till I'm a graduate student, so we can sit around and talk about important things. Which maybe happened and maybe didn't, I don't know. But I actually started out as an undergraduate as an English major, then I switched to music, then I switched to history, and I finally ended up getting my degree in psychology because A, I liked it, but also it would count the most electives. And then, my second degree was in pharmacology, and I had thought about medical school. I took quite a bit of biology as well as psychology, but decided I wanted to study neuropharmacology. So I looked at the neuropharmacology of depression and schizophrenia. That's what I studied. And I actually left that program. It was a doctoral program, but I left it with a master's degree because I loved it intellectually, but I hated just the isolation of working in the lab. And I didn't think I could do that, for the rest of my career. So I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for a couple of years, and then I just wanted to do something completely different. And I met somebody who had gone to graduate school in music performance without having an undergraduate degree in something else. So I decided I wanted to do that too. So I went and got my master's degree in vocal performance. And but I needed a graduate assistantship, and since I didn't have an undergraduate degree in music, they wouldn't give me a teaching assistantship or anything in the music department. So my dad said, well, you like statistics. Why don't you go to the institutional research office? They do, research, and maybe they could use you. So that's what I did, and that's how I between that and teaching statistics in the College of Ed, that's how I funded my music degree. And that ended up becoming my career. I've actually done that for the last 23 years. I've done institutional research, and I'll talk a little bit about what that is. So I did that. I worked at a couple different colleges, in institutional research. And then I did, my doctorate is probably the degree that I went into not less strictly for intellectual interest. I, went into it because I needed a terminal, what they call a terminal degree, so a doctorate, to advance my career. But also, I was interested in organizations and leadership, and this particular program had some training in nonprofit leadership, and I did a lot of volunteer work on nonprofit boards, so I thought it would be helpful to me. And just as, another aside, I also probably have the most random collection of things that I've taught at colleges. I mentioned statistics. I've also taught applied music, so I taught vocal music, and then I taught personnel management. so that's pretty random too. And I mention this because, you look at that collection and think, well, how does that outfit you for a career? And it turned out, again, speaking of synchronicities, that it actually prepared me pretty well for what I do now, which is institutional research and assessment. And I'm going to make a little joke here too. So I am an administrator, and the joke is that, totally untrue, by the way, but that those who can't do teach, and those who can't teach administrate. Anyway, so I am an administrator, and what I do is that I help the leadership of our college learn about our college and what's going on. Our students, our finances, our faculty, our curriculum, and I help them improve it using data and research of various types. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what I do. So, having talked a little bit about my own personal journey, I would like to talk a little bit about the value of education. Obviously, I believe strongly in the value of education, and I think most people in this room believe strongly in the value of education. Education is certainly a very contested area, right? We differ on perhaps what we think the goals of education should be, but one of the values of education that you hear a lot about is, the financial and economic value of education. So we pretty much, and I'm always a little suspicious of this because, in these data there are other things that are represented, like racial and class inequities. There are certainly differences in where people start from and the barriers that they face. But generally speaking, education improves labor market outcomes. Okay, the more education people have, the more likely they are to get employment, to stay employed. They are more likely to learn more on the job and to advance in their career. And of course, they also earn more, right? And so economists will also point out, right, that people who are educated and earn more, they pay more taxes. But there are some other benefits of education. People who have more education are more likely to vote. They're more likely to be volunteers. They're more likely to, for example, serve on boards, in volunteer capacity for nonprofit organizations, and these types of things. The other thing that is touted as a value of education, and again, I mean, I think there are qualifications to all of these, but education can also work to reduce inequity. It can reduce poverty, it can improve social mobility, it can decrease, differences, economic differences, certainly between groups, and power disparities between groups. And as an interesting aside, I wanted to mention this. We're hearing a lot lately, about the possibility that we're over-educating people, that there aren't enough jobs, for college-educated people. We really need more tradespeople. We've over-educated our workforce out of, employability. And so I think there's two counters to that. I think the first thing, and this is something I found out kind of recently, is that the trades are getting increasingly more complex. There's a shortage of mechanics, but part of the reason there's a shortage of mechanics is because everything is computerized now. We have very, very complicated systems that are, that are computerized. We have hybrid cars that have two different types of engines, and so actually people need more education than they did in the past to be a mechanic. And also, we say, well, we have, fewer people working in factories, but we have a critical need for people who can come into factories and replace and repair, the technology in factories. There's a field called mechatronics. So we don't have people working in the factories. But we have these mechanized robots, I guess. And there's a critical shortage of people who can repair those and keep them running. The other argument, I would say for education is that education is the value of education is not solely economic, right? If we have trouble filling certain types of jobs because they're unfulfilling and low paying, maybe, the idea is not to educate fewer people so we can get people who take those crappy jobs, but to look at why do we have an economy that's full of crappy jobs, right? Is there a way that we can create meaningful work for people? So I also wanted to talk a little bit, because I've worked in liberal arts education, about the value of liberal arts and interdisciplinarity. Experts are valuable. If you have to go to an oncologist, or, God forbid, but you really want your doctor to know their stuff and be very, very narrowly, educated in the particular medical need that you have, right? So experts are valuable, and I don't want to downplay that, but generalists are also valuable. I mean, my job is an example, because I work with faculty and staff across our college, and I need to have a basic understanding of what's important to them, how they approach problems so that I can help them, how to help people who have different skill sets work together as a team when maybe they don't quite speak the same language or think the same things are important. Innovations also often occur where disciplines overlap, because looking at the way different disciplines approach a problem can sometimes give you an idea, a novel solution, ideas for novel solutions to problems that pull from different disciplines, right? The other thing is that effective citizenship in a democracy requires broad understanding of science, history, government, right? The arts even. So I think that's very important. And there are we want our politicians, for example, to understand a lot of different issues because they'll have to make decisions about those issues for us. And also, this was another thing that, broad general knowledge protects you from poor decision making, right? You may not be a doctor, but you want to understand enough about what your doctor's telling you about your treatment alternatives, to make a good decision for you. And then another thing is that they have found that people who have wide interests are happier and more engaged. So having a broad range of interests, can help prevent depression and anxiety too, because you have a larger, set of possible solutions to problems. So a couple things I wanted to talk about. The first one was environmental enrichment. And this is actually something I did my undergraduate thesis on. And I just think it's so fascinating. And it is the phenomena that when you stimulate the brain by creating interactive physical or social environments, it actually results in changes in the brain. And so this was originally, I think the first time they kind of noticed this phenomenon was when they noticed that pet rats performed better on cognitive tests like mazes and problem-solving challenges than lab rats did. So that was the first indication that maybe having a little more stimulation, was helpful. So it was studied in animal models, and they also observed it, because we can't do those kinds of experiments on humans, but they've observed it in human populations. What an enriched environment is placing toys, wheels, tunnels, and all these kinds of things into a rat's environment, and then and allow the rats to interact with it. Okay, and this is a fun experiment to do, by the way. And then you handle the rats. The rats also get to interact with each other in a social environment. And what they have found is that it increases the actual volume of the cerebral cortex if you do this in developing rats. And then later studies found that it increased the number of synapses, or connections between brain cells. It increased the number of branches on brain cells. Brain cells kind of look like a tree with branches going out to other brain cells and connecting. And so it increased the number of branches. It increased the size and activation of the connections between brain cells. And it also increased the number of support cells for each brain cell. There are support cells that support the growth and development. So that's really interesting. It has a lot of implications, both for developmental education. This is part of why you don't want children in, impoverished environments, and I don't mean just poor, but not interesting or interactive. This is part of why we would like to see, universal preschool for all children, so that they have this environmental stimulation. They've also found that, enriched environments and a lot of stimulation is helpful for prevention of normal cognitive decline and aging. It can help the progression of Alzheimer's. It can help with brain damage or injuries. And this is really exciting stuff, because it means your brain isn't just gonna, it's not, as good as it's ever gonna get, and then, you can't improve it. The other thing that I think is really exciting in education, and this is some work by Carol Dweck, is the idea of growth mindset. And that has to do with the fact that the beliefs that people have about learning and intelligence, and in particular, what failure means in learning, really influence their outcomes, okay? So if you believe that intelligence is fixed, that ability is fixed, you are going to be less motivated to persist when you come up against failure. Because you're going to think, well, I just can't do that. Because I'm not smart enough, or I can't play guitar because I don't have musical ability, right? Whereas if you have a growth, so that's the fixed mindset. The growth mindset is that, I can manage this and change my intelligence and my ability through my own effort and persistence. And so people that believe that are more likely to persist. And they see failure as part of the learning process. And so again, they, and because of that, they put in more effort and they're more likely to achieve their goals, their educational goals. And what's really exciting about this research is that whether you have a fixed or growth mindset itself is not fixed, and that people can actually develop a growth mindset from having a fixed mindset. So I think that's very exciting. We talk a lot about that when we are talking about what we want to instill in our students. Then the other thing I wanted to mention that's come up a lot is the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is actually a negative thing. And I think we've all probably experienced this lately. So this is a cognitive bias that people who have limited experience or expertise on a subject overestimate their knowledge. And this is the phenomenon where, people who know absolutely nothing about something will argue with an expert because they think that they know more than they do. I call it the internet troll phenomenon, right? And you see it in education a lot, by the way, because people have been students, almost everybody's had the experience of being a student, they think that they understand education as well as any teacher or education researcher, right? So then the other thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit is we are finding out, and this is something that we've been doing some applied research on at Oxford College that I think is really interesting, and that's the value of reflection. And reflection can really be defined as this pause for careful and critical thought. So you learn something and then you stop and you think about, well, what does this mean? And they found that this actually can aid in deeper learning because you integrate your learning, right? You don't just memorize something, you actually integrate it. And it also, and this is where I think it's interesting to us as existentialists, helps the creation of meaning making, right? And we've actually been able to identify some features. When we first started, we set reflection and reflective learning as an outcome, as a learning outcome for our college. And when we first had to assess it, we thought, how are we going to measure this? This is like so, it's so kind of weird and nebulous. How are we going to measure this? But we actually discovered that there were a couple key characteristics of good reflection, and that is thinking about what did I do, what did I learn, describing it. What were the salient characteristics of it to you as a learner? What were the emotional characteristics of it? What emotions did it bring up in you, right? And then how does it fit? How does it fit into your past knowledge, into your past understandings about yourself, about society, about a discipline, and then how did it change you or what you thought, or maybe did it reinforce something that you already knew? And then the final thing that is important in reflection is thinking about, what do I do with this? I learned something. What do I do with this, right? So for instance, if I learned something about white privilege, then what am I going to do with this going forward? How does this change what I do in the world? So those are some of the things that I thought that y'all might be interested in, some things that I've worked with in my professional life, and that I think are important as we think about lifelong learning and what learning means to us. And that's all I have, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions later.
Thank you, Kathy.